Hello everyone, and welcome back. Gravity Rush is a really underrated game in my opinion. I feel like lots of people know about this game, but no one really talks about it, despite it being a really fun experience with quirky characters, an interesting world, and most importantly, engaging gameplay centered around manipulating gravity to our will, hence the name of the game. But what if we played Gravity Rush as if it was just Rush? Can you beat Gravity Rush without shifting gravity? Here's the rules. So coming up with the rules for this run is kind of hard. Since most of the moves in this game are based on changing the direction of gravity, everything short of running, jumping, and grounded combat should technically be off limits. However, I feel like there are only two moves that are needed to be off limits to keep the spirit of this run alive, those being gravity shifting and gravity kicking, making the main methods of traversal and combat an offense punishable by death. Or a failed run at least. If the game shifts gravity for us, be that through a cutscene, checkpoint progression, or just taking control away from us entirely, that won't count. We have to be the ones to initiate a change of gravitational pull by pressing R1 while in a floating state. Even though it's a close cousin of gravity shifting, I will however be allowing the use of L1 to restore gravity to normal. I'll also be upfront in saying that this is definitely not possible to get through the whole game without using these moves, so this is going to be a segmented minimalist challenge where I'll see which chapters or episodes of the game are completable under these rules, and for those that aren't, how many violations occur. I really have no idea how this run's going to go. It's been years since I played this game, and while I remember the gist of things, the specifics are a complete mystery to me, along with any possible tough spots. I guess we'll just have to figure it out as we go. So, can you beat Gravity Rush without shifting gravity? The opening scene gave me a bit of a panic attack since the dev logos were almost exactly the same as Bloodborne's, giving me flashbacks to the suffering. We start off with a little segment where we have to abuse an apple, natural enemy of gravity, until it falls down below the clouds, rolling through a mysterious city beneath and landing next to an unconscious girl. Gently waking up from her slumber, she realizes that she has no idea who she is, where she is, or how she got here. We get control of her and start making our way up out of the pit we found ourselves in, all the while the mysterious girl questions just what's going on here. Eventually, a strange man appears in front of us, and while he's coming on a little bit strong, turns out he's just looking for someone to help his son, and without much better to do, the girl decides to follow along. After following the man a bit, we come across what looks like a massive wormhole hanging in the sky, sucking parts of the world below in, including the man's house with his child trapped inside. He thinks we can help due to our apparent resemblance to some crow girl, but we obviously have no idea what he's on about. Just then, a mysterious void-like cat that's been following us starts to glow, and as if on command, the girl starts to glow in the exact same way before being chucked into the air and violently tossed around before landing on a wall. Now, while gravity just shifted several times in that scene, it's completely out of our control, so I'm going to overlook it for now. After walking over to the checkpoint marker, gravity once again shifts, which is again completely out of our control, landing us next to the man's house just in time for it to be sucked completely off of its foundations. We now get control of our gravity powers in order to reach the trapped boy, and well, this is where we run into a problem. This segment acts as a tutorial for the gravity shifting mechanics, and the game is very strict on making sure that you stick to its itinerary. Even walking slightly off the intended course will get you teleported back on track, leaving you no real choice other than to do what the game's telling you. In order to shift gravity, you first have to press R1 to float in the air, then press it again while facing a desired direction to make that the new down. The game really wants you to prove that you understand this basic idea, since it forces you to repeat the process 8 times. I thought that I could maybe lower that a bit by instead of shifting gravity to the next rubble segment each time, instead going straight for the house, but of course the game planned for that. After narrowly managing to save the boy, a giant hand lashes out at us from the vortex, but the cat from before is able to quickly dispatch it, putting an end to the chaos. After floating back down to the ground, the father and son get to reunite, and we get to enjoy a deed well done. Though not for long, as their house starts to slide off the edge, and despite very clearly trying to save it and having just saved the kid, both the father and son decide to blame us for this, acting like it was somehow our fault. Is shifter a slur? Feels like I'm getting slurred at right now. The mysterious girl runs away, obviously being quite upset by how she's being treated. After a while, she comes across a door, and after breaking it down, we get a look at the world that we found ourselves in. A city floating alone in an empty, seemingly endless vortex. I absolutely love this world. It feels very whimsical, yet has this constant background feeling of wrongness to it, like a dream that's gone on too long and has stopped making any real sense. After a brief conversation with that strange cat, which we named Dusty, he runs off after a crow, and we have to follow. It's not too hard to follow Dusty, but once we catch up, we have to use our gravity powers to catch the crow he was chasing. Since this is still part of the tutorial for the shifting controls, we don't get much wiggle room here, and trying to work around the shifting just makes the game tell us to do it again, but properly this time. We have to change gravity 7 more times to catch the crow, with one just being to return gravity to normal for 6 violations total. Once we catch up to the crow, it lands on the shoulder of a rather aggressive looking girl, presumably this being the crow girl who was mentioned earlier, who runs off after glaring at us. That basically ends the first episode, and story-wise, it raises a lot of questions. It also doesn't bode very well for this run in the future, as we've barely started and we're already 14 rule violations deep. Yeah, not a good start, but as I've mentioned, this has all been just a tutorial for the movement controls, so it makes sense that I'd actually be expected to use them. Let's just hope that that doesn't keep up for the rest of the game. Immediately after the pro girl leaves, we hear a commotion, and after going to investigate, find a cop being harassed by some hooligans. We step in to help the cop, despite not really knowing what's going on. I mean, for all we know, he has this beating coming. The cop named Sid thanks us for our help, but when we ask him to shine some light on anything that's happening, he seems more interested in us than helping us. Before we can get any useful info, we hear a scream. A man's being attacked by a strange tentacly creature with a big glowing ball on its head. These things are called Navi, and they're the main enemies for the game, and now we have to learn how to fight them. That's right, it's time for more tutorials, this time based around combat. Luckily, combat isn't against the rules for the most part, so this shouldn't require nearly as many rule violations as the movement tutorial. Combat basically boils down to spamming the square button to unleash an array of kicks. You have to hit the red glowing weak spot to actually damage a Navi, which makes things a little bit harder on the bigger ones with more weak spots, but for these little fellas it's really not all that hard. You can also press R2 to dodge out of the way, which works for avoiding damage, but I have a much more practical use for that move in the future, but more on that later. After the first few waves, some floating Navi appear, and these ones are a little harder to deal with. What we're meant to do is a gravity kick, by pressing R1 then aiming at the Navi's weak spot and pressing square, turning us into a homing missile, but that moves off limits, so how are we going to deal with them? Well, when I was playing in the moment, I assumed that we had no other option than to follow the game's plan and do 2 gravity kicks to take out the floaters, then shift gravity to the nearby wall so that we can kick the one standing there to death, for a total of 3 more violations. But later on in the game, I figured out that by getting above the floating enemies and dropping down on them, we can do regular kicks in midair to damage them, which isn't the most effective way to deal with enemies, but does work. Despite being almost certain this will work, since I haven't actually tested it, I'm going to still count these 3 rule violations to the total. You might wonder why not just go back and test it, and don't worry, I'll make that abundantly clear as the video goes on. You might also wonder, if I can't shift gravity, how would I even get above the floating enemies in the first place to drop down on them? And to that I say, again, just watch the video, stop asking questions. After dealing with the Navi, Sid tells us that we should probably leave the area before more cops show up, since the fact that we easily dealt with the Navi is bound to make them feel inadequate and they'll likely abuse their power to get back at us. Damn, okay, maybe this game is a little more realistic than I thought. He says he'll try and smooth things over for us and that we'll meet again sometime, so we may still lack a lot of answers, but at least we've made a friend. Oh, that jerk. Before the episode ends, we get given one more task, where this police officer comes over and mistakes us for a repairman or something, and asks us to refuel a nearby fountain. It kind of comes out of nowhere, to be honest, but whatever. We have to make our way over to the fountain, and this was something that kind of worried me. How hard is it going to be to navigate the city? Since the game kind of expects you to essentially fly everywhere, I was thinking that the city might not really be designed to traverse on foot, but to my surprise, the developers clearly tried to create a world from the perspective of the NPCs living in it, and basically everywhere you need to go is reachable just by walking there, which really helps to make the world feel real. Anyway, when we get to the fountain, we need to collect the fuel for it, which takes the form of these purple glowing crystals found around the area. These are all over the world and they're used to activate various devices, but more usefully can be used to upgrade our various abilities. I won't be covering every time I upgrade an ability, but for reference, you should be focusing most of your gems on powering up your gauge, dodge, kick, and health, in that order of importance. The first 2 of these crystals are simple to get, but the third is too high up to reach with a jump. So how are we going to get it? Well, while we might not be allowed to shift gravity, that doesn't mean that we don't have some aerial options. First, we can still float with the press of R1 as long as we don't actually change the pull of gravity. But just floating doesn't really help much since we can't control our movement in the air. The left stick literally does nothing. But what we can do is dodge. Yeah, dodging in the air moves you slightly to the side. It's pretty hard to control accurately, and until we upgrade our abilities a little, we can't go very far before our gravity bar is depleted and we come crashing down to the earth. But for now, it's more than enough to collect the next 5 gems. The next gem is up on the big screen, and it's a little harder to reach, but it's still within our grasp, and once you have it collected, the game sets your gravity to have us stand on the TV. The last gem is the hardest one to get. It's still in our range, but just barely. Here's a tip, don't aim where you're going when you're trying to dodge towards something, because that'll just cause you to go up. Instead, you want to aim the camera 90 degrees off and dodge to the side. Deposit all of your gems in the fountain and the beautiful water feature will spring back to life. The officer thanks us for our help and even gives us a few gems as payment, bringing an end to this episode. Like I said, I'm pretty sure the 3 rule violations towards the start of the episode are avoidable, but even still, it's not too bad of a result. After collecting a few gems and walking around the area, we accidentally walk ourselves straight over an open manhole cover, ending us up in the sewers. Despite being a poopy pipe, the girl is quite taken to the place and decides to make it her new home, but I mean, think of the smell.
You haven't thought of the smell, you bitch!
We decide to spruce the place up a bit with some furniture, but before we can pop off to IKEA, we hear someone screaming, and of course, that means we have to go investigate. So flail your way up topside and take out the navvy harassing this old woman. She thanks us for our help, though feels the need to diss our fit, which, what the hell, lady, this fit slays. I'd love to do a cosplay of Kat someday. Turns out she's getting rid of an old chair, but instead of wasting it, we ask if we can take it with us, which the lady agrees to. Now, we just need to get it home, which is actually pretty easy. By pressing circle, we can create a stasis field around us, which lets us carry specific objects or even people. This can even be used in combat, since pressing circle again will send whatever we're carrying flying off. This is the best way to deal with flying enemies or ones with weak spots that standard kicks just can't reach, so get used to doing this a lot. After getting our chair back home, our place still looks pretty bare, so it's back topside to find more treasure in other people's trash. We eventually find this student who wants to get his head out of the books and experience the real world. Good thinking, bro. I mean, who needs to learn anyway? I didn't go to uni and I turned out fine. We ask if we can have his old desk and he's more than happy to part with it, so go grab it and use the fast travel sewer pipe to get home. Now things are really starting to come together. All we need is a place to rest, so it's off to find a bed. Our search eventually leads us to Sid, who, since we still don't know our own name, has taken to calling us Cat with a K. Idiot, doesn't even know cat spelled with a C, not a K. Hey, like I said, I didn't go to uni, it's not my fault if I don't spell no good. Anyway, turns out by some coinkydink, Sid's boss is having him haul off his old bed, and for our help earlier, he agrees to let us have it. Apparently, this old bed is a sought after treasure though, as some navvy appear next to it, and we have to wipe them out before they can hurt anyone. There are some different navvy types here, but for all of these things, the strategy is basically the same. Just pop the pimples, and they go bye-bye. With the bed in hand, we head back, and Kat gets settled into a new place. We're in the sewers. What kind of water is she showering in? After exploring the town a bit, we get a feel for the place and once again come across Sid, this time out of uniform. He hasn't been fired or anything, rather, thanks to the credit that he stole from us, he's been promoted to detective and made part of a special task force that's actually working on the down low right now. He and the rest of the task force are hunting down the master thief Alias, and he could actually use our help with it. Before he can tell us what he wants though, his boss comes along and reprimands him for slacking off before dragging him off. We get a call later though, telling us to head over to the roof of the nearby church where he'll let us in on the rest of the plan. Since the area is on high alert, we have to make sure that we aren't spotted by any of the fuzz patrolling around. Since we don't exactly blend in, especially when we're randomly flailing about the sky, the only real way to do this is by making our way around the perimeter to stay out of sight. Once you're directly behind the objective marker, the security up top disappears and you're able to safely head up to the church. Once here, Sid calls us again, telling us about an ancient gem in the middle of the park that the thief is after. His genius idea is to switch the real one with a fake one that he made. For some reason though, he's doing this behind his colleague's back and needs us to pull the swap while he distracts them all, and before we have a chance to protest, he's gone, leaving us with no other option than to just go with the plan and hope for the best. Once again, the best way to get to the next checkpoint is by going around the perimeter towards where Sid's cleared the cops from. This time though, there are a lot fewer walkways, so you'll have to rely on air dodging to keep you from hurtling into the void below. It's a pretty long distance, but your gravity gauge shouldn't run out as long as you keep picking up the refills along the way. Once it's safe, head up and switch the gems. Sid once again rings us to tell us to come over to the nearby woods to give them the gem for safekeeping. Rinse and repeat the method of avoiding guards to get over to the woods, and we can hand the gem to Sid, who seems to be acting a little odd. Well, turns out that that's not actually Sid, and is actually the thief in disguise, and we just helped him with his heist. The real Sid wakes up from behind some bushes, but before we can work out what to do next, the chief calls to get help fending off his son Navi attack, and of course we come along to help as well. These are mostly the same Navi that you've already seen, though in the second wave there's these flying mosquito ones who basically require you to throw things at them to take out since they move around so much. You can only throw an item once and they don't respawn, so always try and make your shots count. After saving the police officers from the Navi, you'd think that we'd be thanked, but they all seem kind of mad at us. Turns out we broke the sacred gem during the battle, but before we can be thrown into cuffs, Sid comes along to show that it's just a fake made out of candy. The chief still wants to have us arrested as an accomplice, but another detective as well as some civilians who kind of just appeared out of nowhere stick up for us, making Kat finally feel a little bit accepted in this strange world she's found herself in. After wandering around a little bit, Kat stumbles across a fortune teller who she figures might be able to help her piece together a bit of who she is. I know that the way I'm describing this story makes it seem like things are just kind of happening, and well, that's because they kind of just are. The story of Gravity Rush is very all over the place, with each episode loosely connecting to each other to slowly form a grander narrative. The fortune teller seems to have been expecting Kat's arrival and already knows everything we want to ask, but all she has to say about our future is that we'll apparently soon meet a man who will change our destiny. She gives Kat an envelope with more information as well as a bill for her services. The letter contains some cryptic nonsense about a white flyer, a blue flag, red runners, an open gateway, and an invitation underground, so we really don't have much to start our search with. Though just then, a white dove rushes past which Kat interprets as the white flyer in question, position, so we have to catch it. Getting it is a little bit of a pain though, as if you get too far out of its range, you'll have to start over, and our only methods of movement aren't the fastest. Running on the ground is quicker than dodging through the air though, so pursue on foot until it perches, then flail up to it, at which point it'll fly away. The second verse is the same as the first, but this time the bird lands with a flock, making it impossible to track the right one. Nearby though, we hear a boy crying, and when we ask him what's wrong, he says that he's lost his dad. The boy says his father was wearing blue, which could have something to do with the second part of the prophecy, so for purely selfish purposes, we agree to help the little crybaby. Since the prophecy mentioned a blue flag on high, we figure that the top of the tall TV tower would be a good place to start looking, so we head over there. Up here we find a pair of blue undies flapping around in the wind, which isn't the classiest of flags, but I guess it still counts. Just then, a balloon vendor way down below accidentally releases a bunch of balloons, which, go figure, just so happen to be red, like the red runners in the Fortune. These will slowly drift higher and higher, but they'll eventually reach a resting point, and even the highest one can be reached before the gravity gauge is out, so don't stress about getting them all before they float off. After collecting them all, we see one more drifting away, so follow it, and by the time you get to it, it's been picked up by a man in blue, who tells us that he wants the balloon for his son. If you haven't put two and two together, this is the dad of that kid from earlier, and it's time that we reunite them, so use your stasis field to pick him up and head back to the boy. Once we get there though, the kid is nowhere to be seen, and the graffiti that was on the alley wall seems to have transformed into a door, or an open gateway one might say. Once we head inside, the dad starts to spout some weird nonsense, so we decide to investigate further in alone, eventually entering this weird out-of-place landscape. Just as Kat starts to question the credentials of the random fortune teller she met, Dusty runs off, causing us to lose our gravity shifting powers as we travel through the pale void. Since we can't shift regardless, this part is actually played as intended. Just run after Dusty, trying your best to avoid the attacks of the huge Navi that suddenly appear. At the end, we find a massive tree with a pipe leading down into the earth, which could be the final invitation underground that the fortune mentioned, and not wanting to turn back after coming so far, we accept the invitation and take a leap of faith. After tumbling down the pipe, Kat lands in this house of a sleepy old dude, and given that we've run out of fortunes to follow, I present to you the man of our destiny. Kat is a bit put off by this turn of events, but turns out that the fortune wasn't about a romantic destiny, and more about a cosmic destiny, as this man named Gage reveals that he's the creator of the world. Obviously, Kat is a bit skeptical of this claim, so after being returned to the regular world and reunited with Dusty, we decided it would probably be a good idea to go find him for more info. We eventually come across him again, staring out into the nothingness, along with a bunch of other people. Apparently, the world is slowly being ripped apart, with the pieces disappearing into the void, separating families and friends who can only wait and hope that one day they'll be reunited. It seems pretty hopeless, but Gade tells us that we're the key to saving the world, and doing so will help us restore our lost memories. He asks if we're willing to help, and of course we say yes, which causes Gade to pull the classic Flasher move on us. Actually, it's kind of scarier than shriveled old Ween, as Gade's body is made up of a swirling black hole. Gade's chest hole gives us a suck, and before we know it, we've entered him completely. That's a hell of a sentence. Inside, we find the lost part of the city with its people still trapped inside, which, since we're kind of in Gade's stomach, leads me to the obvious conclusion that he ate this entire place. He tells us that to return the city to the real world, we must restore what has been lost, which flies over Kat's head, so to keep it simple, we're told to just follow the flowers. These things will bloom after we defeat all of the Navi in an area and will point us the way we need to go. These segments where we have to restore part of the city were probably the parts I was most worried for, as the distance between the various islands we have to travel between is nothing to sneeze at, and at this point in the game, even if your gravity gauge and dodge are fully upgraded, it's a tall order to make it across. Luckily, there's a lot of floating rubble around which we can use as a bridge to get between the islands. This does mean that you'll miss out on a lot of the gems on the regular intended path from section to section, but honestly, I wasn't really collecting these all that thoroughly, and I was never really hurting for them when I needed an upgrade, so you're probably fine without them. To get to the third checkpoint though, there aren't any areas to really stop and take a rest, but luckily the gem path here features plenty of gravity refills, so you shouldn't run out on your way up. Some of the Navi in the fighting areas like to hang out on the walls or ceiling, which makes it kind of hard to have a proper fight with them, but there's plenty of rubble around the place to yeet at them, so we can still take them all out. After travelling around for a while, we come across this weird looking apple tree, and getting close to it causes it to release its energy, which we absorb to get a new power. Each of the episodes where we restore part of the city grants us a new ability, and these are kind of a grey area for me. According to the rules as I set them, these are allowed, but they're kind of overpowered, and I feel like they trivialize the core idea of this run a little, especially this one, essentially just being a powered up version of the gravity kick, with the only downside being a cooldown timer. I'm still going to allow these, but to keep the run interesting, I'll try to not use them, only pulling them out when I really have to. After travelling around the void for a while, we finally come across the lost part of the city, and stepping foot here, a giant Navi appears. Gade tells us that defeating this thing will restore the lost segment of the city, so it's time for our first boss fight. All of this thing's weak spots are way too high up to get at with regular attacks, so you'll have to throw items at it to take it down, but this fight is also where I came across a fun little downside of the throwing attack. It doesn't really work. Well, okay, that's not fair. It works like 80-85% of the time, but the rest of the time, attacks that should definitely have been hits mysteriously just don't deal damage for no seeming reason. It's also not uncommon for projectiles to just not get picked up properly by the stasis for some reason, which still causes them to break, or to just kind of break when you chuck them, which is super annoying in segments where projectiles are really scarce. Luckily, here there's throwable objects everywhere, but it's still frustrating wasting them through no fault of your own. Once the 2 weak spots it has for eyes are destroyed, the boss enters phase 2, getting much faster and gaining a projectile attack. Its last weak spot is also covered most of the time, so you'll have to time your shots well, but this one is also close enough to the ground that just kicking it to death is viable as well. Once its health is fully depleted, the fight isn't over yet. You'll have to go in for a finishing move, and this is easily the worst part of every boss fight in this game, since if you don't do it quick enough, the boss will revive with a pretty good chunk of its health back. Here it's not too much of a problem, but for floating bosses, getting to the weak spot in time with the float dodge is a super stressful experience. With the Navi defeated, the lost segment of city is restored, and the people reunite with their lost loved ones in the streets. Despite seemingly being a loving moment, the Crow Girl suddenly appears and attacks Cat, seemingly pissed off that we've restored the city. Gade steps in to stop the girl, apparently named Raven, from killing us, giving us a chance to run away as we lament the difference in strength between the two of us. On the upside though, with part of the town now restored, so too are some of the trains back online, giving us access to the new district, and Okay, soundtrack, you didn't need to go this hard, but I'm not complaining. This is the entertainment district of the city, and it's always had a bit of a red light district feeling to me, which is kinda sus considering that this area is also home to seemingly Hexville's only school, which just so happens to be the backdrop for the next episode. Kat is drawn to a shop selling school uniforms, making her wonder what it would be like to be a student. As Kat walks up, a student walks out of the shop, almost knocking us over, and despite initially being a little bit annoyed, she gets kinda flustered after getting a good look at him. After recognizing us as the gravity shifter everyone's been talking about, he introduces himself as Newt and asks if we could help him out with something. A friend of his named Echo has been acting strangely and recently has gone missing, so he needs our help to track it down. After confirming that the missing girl isn't Newt's girlfriend, and with a little bit of flattery, we agree to help, which kinda makes me think that we wouldn't have helped if boning him wasn't on the table. Donning a school uniform as a disguise, we split up with Newt so that we can both go gather intel. Searching around, asking every school kid we find, chasing one down and playing 20 questions with another, the only bit of useful info we're really able to gather is that she was keeping a mysterious something in her bag. We also hear a rumor about a missing school bus that fell off the edge of the world, which doesn't mean anything for now, but will come up again later, so keep it in mind. After meeting back up with Newt out front the school, we decide to head to the top of one of the buildings to see if we can see anything around the school, so grab Newt with your stasis field and flop your way to the tallest building. Up here we almost have a romantic moment, but it's interrupted when Newt sees another one of his friends, Maya, who's also helping find Echo, so head over to meet her. Unfortunately, she hasn't gotten any info either. Maya clearly sees that we're into Newt and reprimands him for being such a ladies' man, though he seems a bit clueless to whatever she's talking about. The last place that we can think to check is an abandoned building nearby on campus, and on investigating we finally find Echo, clutching her bag tightly and murmuring to herself. When we try to see what's wrong, a Navi bursts out of the bag and starts to murder with her, causing her to burst into a violent rage, lashing out at anyone or anything around her. There is still a chance to save her though, so we need to defeat the Navi before she's fully consumed by it. Hitting Echo will also cause her corruption meter to increase, so if you're throwing things at her, you've got to be extra careful with your shots, or just use the dropkick method, though that also has its own annoyances. Once all of the Navi's boils are burst, Echo comes across Newt, causing her despair to swell, making the final weak spot appear. She lashes out, screaming about how everyone hurts her. Apparently Newt laughed at her when she told her that she liked him, but he tells her that it was just because he was embarrassed to admit he felt the same way, but she's too far gone for words to reach her now. I started to run low on throwable objects in the immediate area, but luckily I had enough to finish her off. Once defeated, the Navi lets Echo go, and Newt rushes in to make sure that she's okay, reminiscing on when they were kids and apologizing for being so insensitive. Realizing now that she's been well and truly cuffed, Kat leaves the two of them be, the episode ending on the moral that maybe the Navi weren't all monsters, which, where the hell did that moral come from? The thing tried to corrupt and eat that girl. After wandering through the city for a bit, we once again come across Gade, looking out into the void. Apparently it's time to go on the hunt for another lost segment of the city. We wonder why Raven won't help us when we're just trying to save people, but Gade assures us that she isn't evil and is just trying to help in her own way, and the two of our ways of helping just so happen to be in conflict with each other. We decide that if we're in this alone, there's no sense moping about it, and with that, it's time to once again get vored by Gade and go save the town. Inside, we appear on this bridge leading down through a tunnel of lava. Trying to walk across it will just have you plummet into a fiery grave, so Gade recommends that we try sliding. By holding L2 and R2, we can perform a gravity slide, which is a much faster method of movement movement that lets us stick to walls. I found it was a bit hard to use this one though. Sometimes I had to press each trigger separately in quick succession, and other times it only worked if I pressed them at the exact same moment. If you can get it down though, this is probably the most useful and least rule violating move that we get given in these city restoration segments, essentially acting like a run button, but just like with the rest of the super moves, I'll only try and use it when I really need to. After sliding for a while, the bridge breaks apart, and we now have to navigate the lava tunnel using just our floating dodges, using broken bits of bridge and the gravity refills to stop us burning to death. It's not too hard, but it does take a while, giving you lots of time to think, and it was during this segment that one thought popped into my mind in particular. This run kinda sucks. Yeah, I realize that I've been playing through Gravity Rush like this for about 3 weeks now, which is a pretty long time to have been playing and not be all that far through the game. There are of course a few reasons for this though. I was editing the Bloodborne video at the time, I was playing through and scripting the last of my Red Alert runs, I was spiraling into a weeks long on and off depressive episode, making me not want to do anything other than stay in bed and watch hours long compilations of Border Force, you know, the usual. But I also realized that I was kind of just looking for excuses not to play this run, and well, that's because it's just kind of mind numbing and not even all that hard. I've been doing my best to edit around it all, but about 90% of my footage is just me flailing about in the air to slowly move from place to place. The gameplay of this challenge is just holding the directional stick and spamming R2 for hours on end, and it's insanely boring. Just watch this clip for a few seconds. Now imagine this, but for 30 hours, and that's the experience of Gravity Rush without shifting gravity. That's why I didn't want to go back and test if the rule violation in the second episodes are avoidable. I just don't want to play any more of this than is actually necessary. It just sucks because I was really looking forward to this run. I still love Gravity Rush and was super excited to get a chance to play it again, but doing it this way just turns this underrated gem into a total slog to get through. Regardless though, I ain't a quitter, and I've come this far, so let's keep going. Eventually, we come to an area with some Navi to defeat. There are actually a few of these, but the last one in particular is a bit of a hassle since there's both flying Navi and one of these big muscly looking ones who have a surprisingly long range to their attacks. They can also do an AoE if you get too close, making drop kicking their weak points a good way to take some damage, so you'll want to mainly rely on thrown objects to take it down. Problem is, they're a very scarce resource in this area, and the two flying Navi basically require you to waste one thrown object on them each, so you'll definitely run out and have to use drop kicks to finish the big fella off. If you miss an attack, just run away super fast and maybe you'll avoid the follow-up AoE, and remember that there are health pickups in the area if you get too low. Eventually I took the thing down, but it was a real hassle since drop kicking is an even less effective means of dealing damage than throwing things, so I guess it's not just the movement that's a bit of a drag in this run. Eventually Cat finds another apple tree that powers her up, this time giving us the Gravity Typhoon, which lets us summon a bunch of rocks to pelt at enemies. Would have been useful a few seconds ago when I had no objects to throw, but whatever. Again, I'll try and use this as sparingly as possible as to not trivialize things. Once we finally find the lost segment of the city, just like the last time, a giant Navi appears, and it's up to us to... Oh, never mind, I guess Raven's had a change of heart and come to help us. Oh, I guess not. This fight is thankfully a lot less annoying than some of the others in the game. Raven's entire body is a weak spot, so you don't really have to worry about your shots landing but not damaging her like you do with some of the other bosses in the game. She can still block objects you throw at her with her own projectiles or catch them and throw them back at you, but it's really not that hard to get her health down. Once she is depleted though, she moves all the way up to the tallest building in the area, meaning that if you were throwing items at her from the ground, there is just no shot of you getting there in time to do the finishing move. This can be worked around by being near to where she waits for you to finish her when you throw the final shot, but even still, I failed to get the finisher on her several times, forcing me to spend even longer doing a fight that I had already beaten. The finisher doesn't even finish her, and Raven is still able to counter us before running off, but at least we were able to restore another part of the city, which means it's onto some public transport to check out the new area. This is easily my least favorite district in the game. It's an industrial district full of factories and the like, and it's not bad, but I don't know, in most games I find areas like this to be kind of boring to explore, and that's double so when our main form of movement is this. Here we find Sid, who once again is on the job, trying to take down the master thief Alias, and looks like he wants our help again. Alias is now after this district's sacred gem, and Sid has a genius idea to stop him. The exact same idea as last time. I can only see this going well. At least we don't have to sneak around, as this time the cops know that we're on their side. Our first job is just to patrol around the area and make sure that nothing's out of the ordinary. Heading over to the gem site, nothing seems strange, and none of the regular officers have caught on to the fact that they're guarding a fake, so it must actually be pretty convincing. After heading up one of the towers to get a better look around the place, there's a massive explosion off in the distance. Apparently Alias has planted bombs around the place, and the next one has been hidden in the waste processing plant. It's clearly a diversion, but we can't really risk it going off, so it's up to us to get there and get rid of the bomb in time. time. The bomb is buried deep under a bunch of garbage, so you'll have to move it all out of the way before you can pick it up with your stasis field. Taking the bomb to that officer who stood up for us back in the last Alias mission, he's able to defuse it in time, but we now have another problem as the Navi have appeared and are attacking the cops protecting the fake gem. Kat wants to help out, but Sid tells us not to bother since they're the bait, and the plan's working perfectly, which horrifies Kat, who goes rogue to save the cops. After defeating the Navi, one of the cops tells us the Navi kidnapped and trapped some of the officers, so we have to go rescue them now. This part is actually kind of cool. One of the problems with Gravity Rush outside of this run is that a lot of it is very heavily checkpointed, just giving you a location icon and telling you to go here. But for this part, we actually have to look around for the missing police, hearing their panic grow louder as we get closer to help guide us to them. After returning the officers to safety, Kat stops to wonder why the Navi would kidnap people, something that they've never really done before. Smelling something fishy, she decides to go check up on the real gem, but by the time we get there, it's too late, and Alias has already taken it. After trying to catch him and dealing with the Navi, which he seems to be able to control somehow, we manage to corner Alias. Before we can deal with him though, a massive Navi appears, merging with his body similarly to what happened with Echo. Unlike that though, he's able to control the creature, and we have to take him out before he's able to hurt anybody. This fight had me stuck for ages, and while I want to blame the game for it, I'll admit, this one's on me. This is one of the few bosses where throwing objects at it really isn't the strat. A lot of the time, they just won't damage either of its two weak spots, meaning that despite the abundance of throwable objects, you're going to work your way through them quick and still have a lot of damage left to do. His weak spots also act a little bit differently than other Navis, as once they break, he's not dead. Instead, it'll cause the boss to collapse, giving you a chance to damage Alias directly. Damage done to him is permanent, but the weak spots will heal back up to a certain point after a little while. Because of this, you want to maximize how much damage you can do to Alias when he's down, meaning you want to be right next to him when he goes down, and not have to waste time flopping over to him. Despite this, I continued trying to hurl crates and barrels at the thing for literal hours, when if I just stood in front of it, I could have easily dodged the bite moves and just stomped his weak spots, giving me easy access to Alias when he goes down. Again, this isn't the game's fault. This is 100% on me, but just... it was a really frustrating realization. If you have any spare gems and haven't been upgrading your kick, it's probably a good idea to sink some points into it now as well to maximize how much damage you can do to Alias on each cycle. Once defeated, of course, Alias teleports to a specific point and you need to do another stupid finishing move, which I of course failed numerous times, leaving me to have to do the whole thing over again. Seriously, this finishing move mechanic just sucks. At the very least, it shouldn't have been time-based. Now that Alias has been defeated, he can finally be apprehended and brought to justice in front of a court of his peers. Yikes, that's actually pretty gruesome. A lot still remains unanswered about this whole thing though. Just who was Alias? How did he control the Navi? And what did he want with the sacred gems? While we ponder all of that, in the distance, Bobby Hill, all grown up and in the army, watches us as if he's assessing us or something. That night, Sid comes to visit Kat, giving us the day's newspaper that talks of how amazing our battle with Alias was and how popular we've become with the people of Hexville. Apparently, the police forces even considering giving us a medal. It's nice to actually get some acknowledgement for our good deeds, but of course, Sid goes and ruins it by perving on us in our state of semi-undress. Kat is probably around 16 to 17 by the way, and Sid is about 30, so, you know, just keep that in mind. After our grand battle with Alias, it's about time to finally restore the last part of the city, so go find Gade, who's keeping up with our heroic deeds in the paper. While we're discussing things with him, Dusty finds a package of what looks like a moldy cookie and decides to make a meal out of the thing. Turns out, it's actually some sort of anti-Navi poison, which apparently exists. After being transported away, Kat quickly realizes that something's wrong with her powers and realizes that Dusty's not doing too hot. Because of this, our gravity powers are severely limited in this episode, with our gravity gauge depleting super fast. You might think that this would make this stage easier, since it would have to be designed around limited gravity moves already, but this one is actually probably the most difficult so far. The game still expects you to use gravity, just in a more limited form, and since our gauge depletes super quick, we can usually only get about 5 float dodges out of it before running out, and that won't get us very far at all. It's still possible to cross most of the gaps between the mushroom and lily pad platforms, but to do so, you'll have to make the most out of every single dodge. We do get another special move in this segment, but I never ended up using it, so I don't think I'm going to go in depth on what it can do. Things really start to get hard when the boss of the area shows up, taking the form of this massive barnacle-like Navi on the top of the lighthouse. To get up to the lighthouse, we need to use the various mushroom platforms, but these ones are super tall, and with our diminished aerial movement for this segment, a lot of them just can't be reached, making it impossible to even get up there to take it out, at least with float dodges alone, that is. In the end, I used the first special move we got, the spiral claw, to launch myself up to the lighthouse, then float dodge to actually land on the thing and start taking out the smaller Navi. I know this is kind of cheap, but after spending almost an hour jerking around through the air, barely missing the next platform, I just said screw it. The move doesn't say gravity in the name, so it's fine to use it. You'll have to take out the smaller barnacle-like Navi before you can attack the main boss, though they all do share a health bar. There is one of these on the underside of the lighthouse, which is a bit of a pain to get to, but luckily some of the lily pads do have throwable rubble you can use to deal with it. Same goes for the final one that needs to be destroyed. Just throw things at it from the nearby platform to easily drain its health, and since it's a mobile, getting the finishing move on it is actually pretty easy this time. With that, Dusty throws up the poison, giving us access to our full gravity gauge again. A little late, but whatever. The final piece of the world is restored, but this time something's wrong. Seems like the Navi were only playing dead, as it followed us back to the real world, and it's brought its friends along for the ride, so it's time for round 2 with this thing. Even with our full powers back, it seems kinda hopeless. There's just too many Navi for us to deal with alone, but turns out we're not alone. A massive warship rolls in and starts shooting down the Navi left and right. This thing will cover us, helping us take out a lot of the smaller Navi so we can focus on the boss ones. I really don't have much to say about this fight. Now without the restrictions of a low gravity gauge and more throwable items, we can kinda just handle this like we would any other boss. I did get a bit lazy with taking out the final Navi all the way at the top and just use the spiral claw on it over and over again. In hindsight, I probably should have just repeatedly grabbed throwable items from the ground and brought them up, or used the dropkick method, but at this point I'd been playing for hours and my mind was kind of numb to what I was doing. Still though, technically not against the rules, so no harm no foul. With the Navi defeated for a second time, we meet with the commander of the warship that saved our ass, Adult Bobby Hill, aka Yuri. He's part of the special defense force created to help in fighting off the increased Navi menace, and thanks to our tireless work and obvious skill, he'd like us to join his team. I don't know though, something about that boy ain't right, and combined with the fact that we would be put under his control and forced to follow his orders, makes Cat decide to politely decline. Anyway, a new part of town is now back, and it's time to check it out, so let's board the train and head on into the big city. Once we get here, we soon find Gade, who says that he's come to see us off before our big trip. Of course, Cat wasn't planning any big trip, but at this point I figure it's kinda useless trying to get straight answers out of this dude, so whatever. We're sent home to pack, but soon get distracted by a girl staring off into the void below. She's dropped an important letter from her boyfriend down there and is trying to bait us into going to get it for her, using the fact that the military had to step in to save the city to guilt trip us, which actually works for some reason. So most of this episode just sees us dropping down below the city. Like, way down. Like, a concerning amount of down. Sometimes we head into the massive tree trunk that the city seems to be built on, and in these segments we lose access to most of our gravity moves, but of course that doesn't really faze us. None of this is that hard really, since all the checkpoints are well within our reach, but the deeper I got, the more I started to wonder, how the hell am I gonna get back up? I don't remember how we get back up to the city, but I'm really hoping that the game teleports me back up there, because if I have to float dodge all the way back up, whether it's possible or not, I'm probably going to blow my brains out. During the final segment, Raven shows up to try and stop us getting to the bottom of the world for some reason, and we have to try to get past her. Our gravity powers are working again here, but obviously that doesn't change much. She only has 3 attacks, and most of them can be avoided just by moving to the side, the only exception being the one where she summons multiple orbs. You can stop dropping by using the float move and take the time to dodge these, but I found it was more effective to just use some of the bits of wall protruding from the side to block the attacks. Other than that, the black hole she can make will send you back to the last checkpoint if it hits you, which is pretty annoying, but you basically have to try to get hit by this. Once we get to the end, Raven sees something off in the darkness beneath, and seems terrified by it. Before we can figure out what she's scared of though, a beam shoots out from beneath and destroys the platform we're standing on, knocking us out and sending us hurtling into the darkness below. When we blink awake, we're well beneath the world as we know it, trapped in a cage surrounded by a bunch of feral-looking children, with Dusty nowhere to be found. The kids all look at us with shock as we demand to be released, except for their leader Zaza, who begins bashing on the cage and trying to interrogate us. Cat remains obstinate, so Zaza decides to wait her out, keeping her caged until she cooperates. He leaves the world's sleepiest girl in charge of guarding us as the rest of the children head off, and well, Sleepy Girl's gonna do what Sleepy Girl's gonna do, giving Cat a perfect opportunity to make her grand escape by busting down the cage, which works and somehow also doesn't wake up Sienna. We now have to look around for Dusty, so we can get the hell out of here. This is another stealth segment, only this time we're avoiding a bunch of children instead of cops, so probably about the same level of training and professionalism on display. Without Dusty, shifting is off the table anyway, so this part plays exactly like it would in a regular playthrough of the game. Eventually Zaza catches us, and he doesn't look all too happy about our little escape attempt. Luckily, a perfect distraction arrives as Sienna appears being chased by a massive Navi, and Dusty even reappears, giving us the perfect chance to escape. But of course not. We have to help these little brats from the Navi, since they're just a bunch of helpless kids. Personally, I feel that once a kid's gone all Lord of the Flies, they can't pull the "I'm just a baby" card anymore, but I guess that's just me. All the smaller Navi gave me no problem, but the big flying one was a bit of a hassle. There are plenty of throwables around to pop its back knee, but due to its flapping wings blocking most of my shots, I ran through a lot of my ammo really quickly. You can still hit its weak spots, but you have to make sure that you time your shots well so that they slip past the wings. Once all of the waves of Navi have been defeated, the children thank us, and Zaza tells us to come back to his house so he can explain a few things. Apparently, a long time ago their school bus crashed off the side of the world above, and somehow they managed to survive, which was actually foreshadowed way earlier if you remember. Zaza, as the oldest amongst them, took up the responsibility of keeping them safe, which is a responsibility that's clearly starting to weigh on him. The next day we find Zaza to continue our little conversation. He tells us that he's been lying to the rest of the group, telling them that their parents are coming to save them all, but he knows the truth. He also tells us that the void beneath the world has been slowly getting closer and closer, and he knows that one day, even if they can fend off the Navi, the void will still consume them all. Kat tries to raise Zaza's spirits, but it seems hopeless as he tells us that they've already lost people, including his younger sister Sasha, and of course, as their leader, he feels responsible for this. Just then, we hear a growl off in the distance, and a massive snake-like Navi Zaza calls Nushi appears. We tell him to get the rest of the kids to safety while we deal with it, but he says that Nushi is undefeatable, which of course isn't going to stop us trying. Nushi flies around the area in a pattern, only stopping occasionally to fire a laser at the town, which is the only time its weak spot appears and you can do damage, meaning that more than ever it's important to make every shot count since you only get like 3 chances per cycle to land one. The first phase isn't really all that hard since Nushi is more interested in attacking the village than you, but it does take a while and is still pretty damn monotonous. Once we deal the final hit though, its weak spot just grows straight back, so maybe Zaza was right and it is immortal. Suddenly, Raven appears behind us, but this time not to fight us, she's actually here to help since there's no way that we can take this thing out on our own, and despite clearly being still kinda salty about her trying to kill us so many times, Kat accepts the help. Raven's gonna set up a trap and we just have to keep Nushi busy while she does. Its flight path has changed, so you'll have to learn the new pattern and where it's gonna stop to let us get a hit in, but it's still pretty damn easy to chip away at its health with thrown... weird, that seemed like a direct hit. Let me try again and... okay, third time's the charm. Okay, what the hell. So I could just be crazy and all my shots might have just missed, but for this second phase, I swear Nushi's weak spot is completely immune to thrown objects. I tried over and over and over, but I could never get it to deal any damage this time around. This means that we have to use the dropkick method to damage this thing, which is really annoying since we have a very limited time window to flop over above its weak spot, drop down, hope that our kick actually lands before it disappears, and we have to wait for it to become vulnerable again. Nushi moves much faster than we can too with float dodging, so you can't just follow it until it gives you an opening to attack. You need to know when it will be vulnerable and be ready and waiting in a good spot to let you capitalize on that opening when it arrives. Luckily, we don't have to drain the entire health bar like this. In fact, our kicks don't even affect Nushi's health bar. For each kick we land though, Raven will be ready for us to lure Nushi over to her so you can drop one of these giant hairy ballsack fruits on it which will actually hurt it. As the game design bible says, 3 times the charm, and while not defeated, Nushi sulks back off into the void. We thank Raven for her help in saving the kids, who seems weirdly compassionate to them given how cold she's come off in the past. Kat asks Raven to help her find a way to rescue the kids, but Raven shoots her down, saying that no one above cares to save them and that she'll find her own way of doing it. Seems like we have a bigger issue for the moment though, as Sienna's gone missing, so we have to go find her and bring her back. Somehow they've gotten super far away from the city and are standing uncomfortably close to the edge of one of these giant flower things. The flower cracks as Kat tries to save her, but luckily she's able to grab her before she falls off into the void. She's completely out cold though, not even breathing, which I'm not a doctor, but I don't think that's a good sign. She suddenly reaches out and grabs Kat's arm though, so she's definitely not dead, but call me crazy, I still think something's not right here. Whatever this thing is, it tells Kat that the only way that they can save the children is to awaken something sleeping within her, and gets Kat to stare deeply into her eyes. This transports Kat to a strange white plane. Sienna tells us that this is the world created from parts of Kat's subconscious, and that facing our forgotten memories will restore our lost powers. Sweet, finally! This game's been like 90% asking questions so far. Sounds like we're finally about to get some answers. We've also had Dusty taken from us, which means that this is another episode where shifting is off the table, so we get to play as the dead's intended. There are all these glowing pyramids around which will cause us to shift in the direction that they're pointing, but since that's the game shifting for us, it doesn't count. All we need to do is get from point A to point B without falling into the void, all the while Sienna offers little tidbits of knowledge. For all the promises of answers, she doesn't really enlighten us at all to who or what Kat is, just giving us a vague idea of maybe the sort of thing that caused Kat to forget her past in the first place. Nothing definitive. We do at least get to learn though that we will in fact one day die, and there isn't anything we can do about it, so that's a comforting thought, I guess. At the end of all this, we find a version of Kat frozen in ice, and Sienna tells us that to remember the truth we must turn around and go back the way we came, which is a really interesting metaphor. I wonder what it could... Oh, I guess that part was literal. Entering this castle, Kat sees another version of herself, this time dressed in royal garb, which I guess means that she's some kind of princess or queen, but again, no real answers here. Kat snaps back to reality, oh there goes gravity, and Sienna reveals that she's a creator just like Gade. Apparently this entire world is just a dream that she's having, and what we're speaking to right now is the version of herself that takes over while she sleeps, to protect her and the dream world. Despite not really knowing exactly what that whole dream sequence meant, apparently Kat learnt what she needed to, and Sienna tells us that we can now see with our mind's eye and save the children using something called the Ark, which is a structure beneath the town. With that, the real Sienna wakes back up, seemingly not being aware of anything that just happened, so we decide to take her back home. While you float back, you'll probably notice that there are a lot more gems around the place, which have apparently always been there, but we just couldn't see them until we opened our mind's eye. Once Sienna is safely back home, head down to the Ark where Raven is desperately trying to find a way to get it to activate. We tell her not to worry as we now know how to get the thing to work, and after jumping inside, we do just that, floating the Ark up to the city, much to Raven's shock and the excitement of the children, who eagerly board. Just as Cat and Raven are about to activate it to fly everyone home, we once again hear Nushi roaring off in the distance. Looks like it doesn't plan on letting us escape, but Cat notices something strange about it this time. With her new powers, she can now see all of Nushi's weak spots, and thinks that she might finally be able to put an end to the creature. Luckily, whatever immunity Nushi had to thrown objects seems to have disappeared, and its weak spots are now permanently visible for you to pound on, making the fight a breeze. I even found this platform stocked to the brim with throwables that it would fly really close to, giving me a great opportunity to get a ton of hits in on it. After you get Nushi down to half health though, it'll sink way beneath the city and goes back to its old strat of only having one weak spot that's only attackable whenever it's charging its laser. This part is super frustrating since all the way down here there aren't any throwable objects, meaning that to damage the boss you'll need to bring one from up top, then wait for Nushi to show its weak spot and hope that your attack lands. Then, since the only way to get a new throwable object is to go back up to the village and there is no way that our aerial flop is going to get us there before our gravity gauge runs out, you'll have to drop all the way to the bottom of the void, then get out of bounds to get teleported back up top. This process takes ages and is super mind-numbing and repetitive, and it's made even worse every time you miss or otherwise waste a projectile, so more than ever you gotta make sure that you're not throwing away your shots. You could also use the dropkick method, but again Nushi moves way faster than us, making it hard to get in position and land these before your opportunity is gone. I did use a dropkick to deal the final hit of damage though, to make sure that I was in a good position to do the finishing move, since I didn't want to waste any more of my life on this fight than I had to. With Nushi defeated, we return to the Ark, and with Raven and our powers combined, we finally fly the kids to safety. Sweet, I guess that answers the question of how we're getting back up to the city. Seriously, if I had to get up there manually, I think I would have snapped. Cat and Raven talk about how happy all the kids seem to be going home, except for Zaza, who Cat guesses is a little sad that his sister Sasha couldn't be there with them. Raven is surprised that we know that name, and reveals that she's actually Zaza's sister, which just raises a hell of a lot more questions, given that she was supposedly Zaza's younger sister, and Raven seems to be a good bit older than him. Seeing that we're only trying to help, Raven also seems to trust us more now, revealing that the only reason she was trying to stop us restoring the city was because the new mayor promised her he would help the kids if she did, and now with the kids coming back, she intends on finding out why he wanted the city to stay separated. Before our journey is finished though, Nushi once again reappears and attacks the Ark, sending Cat flying off and knocking her out, and when we wake back up, we're all alone halfway back to the Wait, no. No. Tell me that doesn't mean I have to— Yep, we now have to flop, flail, and all around jerk ourselves back up to the city. I don't want to. As always, we can easily make it to platform before our gauge depletes to slowly make upward progress, but it's so monotonous and boring, just spamming R2 over and over and over and over and over again. I was already really not feeling this run at this point, but after this episode I was actively dreading playing it. The only reason I didn't give up and scrap this whole video idea was sheer stubbornness. Eventually we entered the big tree trunk like we did on the way down, which I thought would end my nightmare since before our powers were turned off in here, so I hoped that I would be given another means of ascending, other than float dodges of course, but no, I guess not. We also find this regular ass looking dude down here who's apparently looking for a letter, which sounds a little familiar. Didn't we only end up in this whole mess down here because of some chick looking for a letter? He says that he thinks he saw it a little higher up on one of the flower-shaped rocks and asks if we'd take him up to it. As much as I wish I could say no, unfortunately we're forced to bring him along for the ride for a bit. Now if any of the Navi around the place hit us, instead of just draining a little bit of our health, our tag along will fall all the way back down to the bottom and we'll be forced to waste even more of our life. Yeah, I'm salty about this. Once we get the man where he needs to go, some Navi appear, and since there's no throwables, we have to rely on drop kicks to take them all out, except for the swordfish ones, whose attacks put them in range for our regular kicks, luckily. Once they're all clear, we find the letter for the guy who asks us to return it to his girlfriend before fading away. Yeah, it turns out he was a ghost or something, a fact which Cat seems surprisingly unfazed by. The rest of the trip is pretty uneventful. Once we're back outside, there's not even any Navi around anymore to slow us down, meaning that we can finally get back home. Things are kind of different though. There's an oppressive atmosphere, with soldiers patrolling the streets, and the new mayor and Raven's old boss broadcasting propaganda from the blimp. Still, it's just nice to be home. I'm glad that we can put all that business beneath the city behind us. Oh, come on, you've got to be kidding me. How the hell is this thing still alive? Luckily, though, the airship that helped us out before comes along, and a single soldier with a jetpack is able to put an end to Nushi for good. I mean, I could have done that if I had a jetpack. Commander Yuri tells us that apparently we've been gone for a year, despite it only having been a few days since we left from our perspective. We thank the girl who killed Nushi, whose name is Sea Wasp, but it seems like she's got a bit of a vendetta against us, saying that we're not needed around here anymore. Yuri still wants us to join their team though, since the Navi have only continued to grow in strength, but Cat once again turns him down, still needing to figure out just what happened in her absence. On the way way home, we see just how much the military occupation has changed things. The oppressive, authoritarian atmosphere is palpable. Even the happy-go-lucky sitters join the military, with the police force being absorbed into it. But worse than the military police patrolling the streets, the epic music in the entertainment district got switched off. What the hell, that's too far. While roaming around getting a feel for the new way of things, we come across this scientist, who seems to be in quite a bit of a pickle. When he notices us, he starts to nerd out and be super excited about the Gravity Queen's return, introducing himself as Adrix? And asking us if we could do him a small favour. Apparently, he dropped some critical research off the edge, and his boss is not going to be happy if he finds out, so he needs us to go get it for him. Kat is a little worried, seeing as the last time someone asked us to get something they dropped, it turned into a surprise year-long vacation, but this time it's not going to be an adventure to the bottom of the earth, so we agree to help. After getting Adrix his briefcase with his research back, he has another request, for us to set up a bunch of sensors in specific locations to help with his research of the Navi. Gotta say, kinda starting to get a bit sus of this random quote-unquote scientist who's asking us to set up some very bomb-like looking objects, but Kat doesn't want him to get in trouble with his boss, so we agree to grab them and take them to the various designated points. Two of these just require us to get the sensors in place, but the other two are guarded by Navi, who we have to take out first, with one of the lots of Navi being especially annoying to deal with since they're on the roof. Chucking objects at them would be the easiest way to take them out, but with hindsight, I can say that you want to save as many throwables in the area as you can for later, so if you can stand it, I'd recommend drop-kicking all of these ones. Returning to Adrix, he has yet another request for us, since he apparently forgot to switch on one of the devices, and now needs us to go do it for him. Really starting to test my patience here, mate, but he complains more about how mad his boss will be if it's not done, so fine. Flop over to the definitely not a bomb, switch it on, defeat the Navi swarming it, flop back, and Adrix tells us that, "Oh, you're really pushing it here." Even Kat seems to be getting a little sick of this dude's constant requests, but after some more whining about losing his job, Kat agrees to just one more assist. This sensor is easily the most annoying since after we've placed it on the roof, a massive swarm of Navi appear and start attacking it. All these Navi appear on the ceiling, making them a hassle to have to take out. Plus, if we stray too far away looking for things to throw at them from the ground, the bomb will be destroyed and the swarm of Navi will be reset, respawning those that we've already defeated. Once we first place the bomb and every time the swarm is reset, the game will spawn us with the gravity shifted to the roof, which makes some of the Navi a little easier to deal with since we can just use regular kicks to get rid of them, but a single hit will cause Kat to drop, so try to avoid any damage to maximize how long you can spend on the ceiling. For all of the floating and flying Navi, I use drop kicks since, as I mentioned earlier, we have limited space to work with, which means limited items to throw, and I wanted to save as many as I could for the buff one and the big flying one that spawned later. Even then, I soon ran out of throwables, so I decided to just use the spiral claw to clean them up. Returning to Adrix, he has yet another sensor, but luckily this one's just a spare. With all his research now completed, Adrix says it's time to blow up the sensors, so I guess I was right, and they were bombs all along, though this is just to get rid of them so they don't keep drawing in Navi, nothing nefarious. We're still not done yet though, as now Adrix remembers that he's running late for his airboat, and of course if he's late his boss is gonna fire him, so he wants us to give him a lift. Fine, whatever. We have to take him a not insignificant distance in 2 minutes and 30 seconds, which isn't too tight, but this little prick forgot that he needs to deliver his research before he leaves, so we have to divert course midway through so that he can deliver the stuff, then take him back to the airship. I could just drop you, I could just let you fall, you little piece of shit. I'm pretty sure that this is time-based and not distance-based, so if you head towards the second location first, you can save the time it would take you to double back at least. Even still, the time here is pretty damn tight, and after about 6 tries, I was just barely able to make it. With that, Adrix says his goodbyes, thanking us for saving him from being fired. As soon as we're out of sight though, a much cockier side comes out, and upon returning to his lab, he talks with his boss, the new mayor, about how interesting he found us, and how he'd like to harness the power of Dusty. The mayor says that he'll send someone to take Dusty from us, and also mentions that with Raven now missing, they'll have to use us for whatever it is they're planning. Kat though is completely unaware of anything that's going on, and is taking a sleep after a long day. She's a little restless though, as she worries about Raven and all the children still missing on the Ark. Upon waking up, something doesn't quite seem right, and after pulling the sheets back, she finds Dusty, or more accurately, Dusty's. More worrying than whatever's going on there, Alias appears outside, despite the fact that he was very definitely dead the last time we met. He says something cryptic about this being our last dance before floating off with all of Dusty's lost segments, so we leap out of bed, apparently fully clothed, to pursue. We appear where we first woke up when we arrived in Hexville, without our gravity powers since we don't have Dusty with us. I forgot to record this part, so you'll have to deal with an artist rendition for a little while. We have to chase after Dusty's multiple segments with gravity occasionally flipping on us, though we don't control it, so it doesn't count. We also occasionally see glimpses of Raven and the kids who are still missing in action on the Ark somewhere. After collecting 10 of Dusty's segments, we come to the area where we first got our gravity powers at the start of the game. Alias has transformed the remaining segments into these panthers, and they won't change back and become collectible until we defeat the Navi guarding them. Most of them are pretty easy to take out, only having fairly basic grounded Navi to deal with. There is one wave that features some floating Navi, who usually I'd say are best dealt with throwables, but they're a pretty rare resource in the area we have to work with, and you'll definitely want them for later, so I'd say it's just best to use drop kicks on these dudes. Seriously, what's with the last few episodes featuring areas with very little access to throwables? I feel like one of the developers must have caught on that there are an easy way to deal with Navi without risking getting hit, so decided to thin them out a bit in the late game. For the final Panther, after 2 waves of Navi, we have to deal with not only one of those big buff ones, but also the game just straight up throws the first boss fight at us, this time as a standard enemy. This is when I would start using up your supply of throwables, since the combo can be pretty annoying to deal with, though still save some of your ammo since you'll still need it for later. I actually super lucked out here, and after destroying the boss Navi's eye weak spots, pushing it into phase 2, and trying to attack me, it ended up killing its friend without me even needing to do anything to it. That's something I haven't really mentioned, is that Navi can damage each other, but it's basically impossible to control this, and it just kinda happens randomly sometimes, but that doesn't make it any less helpful when stuff like this happens. With all the pieces of Dusty now restored, our powers are fully back, and we can go destroy the last Panther. Problem is, it's being guarded by 2 of the buff Navi and 2 of the swordfish ones. The swordfish ones come at us, making them easy to kill, but the 2 buff fellas worried me, since if I ran out of throwables, I don't think there was any chance of me taking them out before my health was fully drained. Luckily, I found another stockpile of objects behind them, and with that, I had enough to take both of these Navi out. Unfortunately though, after dealing the last hit, I accidentally left the area, causing Cat to disappear and respawn a good distance away from the last Panther. And as you might have guessed, this fight's not over until we've done a finisher. I got super panicked that I'd have to fight those Navi again, but it seems like this time the finisher isn't timed, which, thank God. Again, looks like I forgot to record for a bit here. I really have no idea what my brain was doing at the time, so again, artist rendition until my footage resumes. Alias returns and reveals his face to Cat, which shocks her, but we don't get to see who he is, so that's just more questions for the pile. Cat wakes back up with Dusty in one piece, so I guess that was all just a dream. But weirdly, Sienna is also in our room with no idea of how she got there or where Raven and the rest of the kids are, though the fact that she's alive reassures Cat that the rest of them are okay too. As soon as the episode ends, we see the mayor's massive propaganda ship, broadcasting a message for everyone to gather in the city square for an important message, so flail your way over there. At the city square, we find Gade hanging out and strike up a convo, but he just wants to talk about how the world is going to end soon. He says something big is coming, and just then, the mayor, along with that scientist we met, show up on a massive float. Cat is surprised to see Adrix, and Gade is also surprised that we know him, saying that he's only ever heard bad things about him. The mayor interrupts, announcing that today is the day that he'll be putting an end to the Navi menace, using a new super weapon they've created called the Anemone. Suddenly, a massive swarm of Navi appear, which the mayor just sees as a chance to show off his new toy. We have to help the Anemone defeat the huge horde of Navi, but when I say help, I mean kill a few Navi while the super weapon does most of the work for us. Yeah, we don't really have much of an effect here, and after a while, Sea Wasp appears, weirdly attacking us rather than the Navi. Apparently, our arrest has been ordered since, with the Anemone and the rest of the anti-Navi force, we're not needed or wanted in this town anymore by the powers that be. We call her out for just being a mindless drone following orders, and say that if they're willing to get rid of us, what happens when she outlives her usefulness? But Sea Wasp is unmoved, so we have to take her out. This fight is almost identical to the one with Raven earlier in the game. Actually, it's probably even easier, since she does this charge attack occasionally, putting her in easy kicking range, meaning we don't just have to rely on throwables. I still had to do it twice since I missed the first finishing move when she zipped off to the tallest building, but with hindsight I could take her down from nearby, making the trip to finishing her easy peasy. Upon approaching her after the fight though, she activates a nearby device, sucking up Dusty before calling a ship to apprehend Cat, dousing her in a mist that freezes her solid. As all seems lost, Sid comes along, seeing the Cat's in trouble, and straight up downs the ship with nothing but a pistol. Damn, maybe I gave this dude too much crap. Low-key, he's kind of a badass. Unfortunately, it looks like there's no hope for Cat. Sid tries to talk some sense into Sea Wasp, but it seems like there's no swaying her. Just then, though, something strange seems to happen to the enemy as the military loses control of it, and it begins firing wildly into the city, even downing the army's command ship. Sea Wasp flies off to stop it as Sid continues to try and restore Cat, but Sienna in her sleepy time form appears, telling Sid to stop interfering with the dream. She uses her power to free Dusty, who immediately returns to Cat. While trying to take down the enemy, Sea Wasp is almost cooked, but Cat swoops in at the last second to save her. Despite having just saved her life though, Sea Wasp still demands that we stand down, but she's in no condition to turn away our help, so it's time to take the enemy down. No matter what you do to the thing, it seems like nothing's going to affect it. Drop kicks, thrown objects, nothing even scratches it. After landing a few hits though, Sea Wasp finally decides to lend us a hand, firing a massive shot that reveals a weak spot for us to target. Oh, that's okay, you just take a little nap, you are such a big help. Now we can actually hurt the enemy, but we have to act fast doing so, since if it destroys too much of the city, it's game over. I struggled with this part pretty hard, and I kept failing because the city would be destroyed before I could defeat this thing. After a few tries, I was able to get it by using the Spiral Claw every chance I got. The enemy also acts a lot like Nushi did in its fight, stopping at specific points which are the easiest times to land hits. Depending on which place it stops at on the cycle, you want to alternate what you'll use to attack, using throwables when they're readily available, and using drop kicks as a backup when there's nothing around to yeet at it. Once its health has been fully depleted, 3 more weak spots appear, and you guessed it, we now need to take all of these down too. Throwables are a much more readily available resource in this area, so I just use those here. This isn't as easy as usual though, since there are a boatload of Navi that appear to help out the super weapon, making it hard to even pick up throwables sometimes. You also can't spend too much time thinning the normal Navi out, since the city destruction meter is still increasing, so you really can only focus on attacking the boss itself. Hot tip, tip, since the game autosaves after you beat the boss for the first time, you can just intentionally fail here, and when you restart, you won't lose any progress, but the city destruction meter will decrease, which is super helpful. Destroying any of the Navi's weak spots will push it forward a little and cause a new wave of Navi to spawn, so really it's probably best to only focus on one weak spot at a time. You can also use the same intentionally failing trick after each weak spot you pop to again reset the timer, as well as all the throwables, which again I highly recommend. I don't think it's even possible to do this fight in one consistent go. With one weak spot left, the enemy heads up super high, which is a bit of a problem since by the time we can get up there to meet it, it's had ages unencumbered to attack the city, giving us even less time to finish it. Plus, our gravity gauge will probably be almost completely depleted by the time we get there, but with a spiral claw and a few drop kicks I was able to knock its health down for the second time, and yet the enemy is still not down, now merging with a nearby tower and growing a massive cannon to pelt the city below. On top of this, its weak spots are now gone, so there's no way we can even defeat it. That's when Sienna appears telling us to rip a hole in space-time. Gate also appears opening up his chest cavity and telling us to use a finishing move on him. Epic gameplay, I know. After finally getting to and using our power on Gabe, the Ark launches out of his chest, colliding with the enemy, and out of the Ark comes Raven, ready to help put a stop to this thing. With that, the enemy can now barely function anymore. Adrix and the mayor finally decide to use the self-destruct on it. Unfortunately, it's now flying super low to the city, meaning that if it goes off, the entire district will go with it. We have to finish it off before that can happen, in just 6 minutes. This is where the real problem of this final battle begins. The enemy is constantly moving, making it incredibly hard for us to get close enough to attack it, and even if we can get a hit on it, it'll still be long gone by the time we get another. Even if we could consistently damage it, after we get its health past half, it erects a shield, and in order to damage it, we need to lure the enemy to either Raven or Sea Wasp to lower the shield first, and there's just no way that we would be able to travel these distances with the float dodge with the time that we have. As such, there is absolutely no way to beat this episode without using gravity. I even ended up looking up another run of Gravity Rush without using gravity by press continue and skip to the end to see if they had any solution, but no, apparently this part got him stuck too. This really sucks after how far we've come. I mean, sure, the first 2 episodes forced us to use our powers, but honestly, since those were just tutorials, I could kind of overlook it. I'd actually even pre-written the outro proclaiming them not to count since they were just tutorials, but with this, no, it's a proper defeat, and a big one at that. Like, I lost count of how many times I had to shift in this, probably like 30 plus in the end. After depleting the enemy's health yet again, Raven and Sea Wasp pin the enemy down, allowing Cat to deal the final blow, destroying it before it can blow up and saving the city and everyone inside once again. Over the credits, we see what happened afterwards to all of the characters that we've come to care about, but what we don't really get are any answers to the questions that are still hanging. Who is Cat? Who was Alias? What are the Navi? Why did that one Navi apparently try to help that girl? And what even is this world? I guess all of that will just have to wait for the sequel. So, can you beat Gravity Rush without shifting gravity? Well, to my surprise, for the most part, yeah, but in totality, no. Even if I was able to overlook the shifting in the tutorial missions, which honestly I'm inclined to, we totally trip over at the last hurdle. Even then, I'm surprised at how much of this game is beatable like this. 19 out of 21 episodes being successful isn't too bad. That being said, though, I highly recommend that you don't try this one yourself, as it's easily the most boring, monotonous, arduous, synonym run that I have ever done on my channel. In fact, it's not even a challenge run. A more fitting term for this would be an endurance run. It takes what I still believe to be a real hidden gem of a game and turns it into, I don't know, just like a boring rock. Seriously, just play Gravity Rush, it's a good game, I swear. With that being said though, thanks for putting up with this one with me if you made it to the end, and please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this and want to see more videos like this. I know that my videos aren't the highest quality thing you can find on this godforsaken website, but I do genuinely put a lot of my free time and effort into them, so I really appreciate those of you who have enjoyed them. I should also mention that with my upload schedule being what it is, this will probably be my last video for the year, or at least my last challenge run. I also intend on taking a break from working on runs for the rest of December to spend time with my friends, family, and work through some of my regular gaming backlog, so probably don't expect a new run until mid-January. With that being said, Merry Chrysler, happy rotation around the sun, I've been Katie Cat, and I'll see you next year. And it was around this... Do you mind? I'm recording here. Oh, the audacity!
I'm sorry.